Hi Year 7 and welcome to your next lesson in the series that we're doing all about medieval life. And today we're going to be looking at the medieval church and specifically how did the Christian church govern everyday life in medieval England. So looking at the importance of the church and the role that they played within society and in everybody's day-to-day life. So on this next slide you can see a series of questions, and these actually refer back to what we were doing in the previous lesson all about medieval knights. So the last thing that I asked you to do was try and find the answer to these particular questions from your knowledge organiser, and here you can see all of the answers. So all that you need to do is find your work from last lesson. Can you just double check the answers that you put? Can you mark them if you got them correct, alter them if you got them wrong, and write down the correct answer if you didn't actually write anything and you left it blank. So just pause the PowerPoint for a minute whilst you just have a look at your answers and do any corrections or marks that you need to do. So the first thing that we need to bear in mind is the information that we can see on this next slide, is that in the medieval period everyone believed in God. So when we're thinking about medieval England, it wasn't like it is today, where it was multicultural and we had lots of different faiths and people followed lots of different religions because of their background and their kind of ethnic group. This particular point within history, the majority of people that lived in England were Christians, so they all followed the same religion. And that explains why the Christian religion had so much power and was also something that was so important to everybody within society, whether you were the person right at the top and you were the king, or you were a really wealthy baron, or you were a peasant right at the very bottom. Every single person believed in the same God, and they all believed that you had to be a good person to be able to get into heaven, and if you weren't, then you go into hell. And this is something that we'll look at in a little bit more detail later on. So on this next slide we can see one of our keywords for today, and the keyword is clergy. So when we talk about clergy, what we mean is the officials of the Christian church. So these were the people that were ordained, so these were the people that have been given the right and the job to actually lead church services within society. So whether it was in a town or it was in a little medieval village, it didn't matter, but these were the people that had been given that power by the church to actually carry out services and kind of act as God's representative, if you like, as well on earth. So on this next slide we can see something that we've looked at before, which is a pyramid, and it's showing the social order or the structure of society during the medieval period, where you've got the king at the top and you've got the peasants at the bottom, and then you've got other people such as the knights and then the barons and lords in between. Now it's really important because it shows us that no matter what level you were within society, the church was always just as important to you if you were at the bottom as it was to the person that was at the top, or if you were the person in the middle. So the church played a massive part in everyone's life, and it also helped to reaffirm and help people understand why their place within society was important, and why it was that maybe they were never going to get out of the situation that they were in. It was kind of reinforced by the church that if you were a peasant, it was because God had wanted you to be a peasant, basically. And it also kind of told you or gave you a purpose for what you did. So if you were a peasant, you would be told by the church that that's because it was your job, God believed it was your job to farm the land and to provide for the people that were above you. If you were a knight, then it was your duty, it was your job to protect people and to fight for people. If it was that you were a lord, then it was your duty to serve the king and carry out his orders and make sure that things were being ruled effectively. And if you were the king, then it was your job to kind of be a really good example of what a good Christian should be, but also rule your country and protect Christianity as well. So on this next slide, what you can see is, again, you can see a pyramid shape. So again, it's this idea of the structure of something, and it's going from the least powerful at the top to the least powerful at the bottom to the most powerful at the top. And that's why you've got that arrow pointing up the side that says power. So what we'd like you to do, and you can just do this yourselves, you don't need to send this in, but you can just have a think about where you'd put these people, and then on the next slide you can see if you got them right. In the box you can see a list of all of the important people within the Christian church. So you've got bishops and abbots, you've got priests, monks and nuns, the Pope, archbishops and cardinals. So have a go at putting them in order from who you think was the most important person within the structure of the church to the least important people within the structure of the church, and just putting them, ranking them into the correct order. And then on this next slide, what you can see is, you can see that big long list of people with them put into the right order on the triangle. So at the very top you've got the Pope, then underneath that you have the cardinals, then you have the archbishops, then you have the bishops and abbots, and then you have the priests, monks and nuns. So the Pope is the most important. He's supposed to be God's representative on earth. So the person who is carrying out kind of God's work, giving out his message to everyone. He's that direct link between heaven and earth, basically. And then right at the very bottom you've got the priests, the monks and the nuns, and they were the people that did the everyday jobs. So they would look after people, they would listen to people's prayers, they would carry out kind of the weekly services in the local churches, they would run local kind of religious celebrations at Easter or at Christmas, and things like that. So on these next few slides we can see different images and different representations of churches within medieval England. Now this first illustration is not just a church, as you can see it's absolutely massive. It's also a abbey and things like that, so it's a really big kind of complex, we would say, and it shows you the size, the power and also the wealth of some of these churches and of Christianity as a whole during this particular period. And if you imagine that you were a little peasant that lived in one of the surrounding villages, or you were a farmer who was farming one of the surrounding fields, this would have been a really impressive, really large building. It might have also been a building that was a little bit frightening because it was so big and it was so grand, and it might have looked a bit strange because of some of the architecture. The only other people that would have had houses that were even anything like this, and they would have been a much smaller in size, would be kind of the lord and lady of the manor, so the people that you worked for, the people that owned the land that you farmed. So it gives us this idea of why kind of religion and also power are both kind of linked together, because ultimately they're seen as kind of one and the same thing. On this slide we can see the inside of a monastery. So this is somewhere that monks would live, and a monk was a man who devoted himself to the Christian church. So they would never get married, they would live all together in a monastery, and this shows them at a mealtime all eating together and having some food. So for the rest of the time they would spend it either copying out manuscripts or praying or doing things like growing their own food, looking after people that were sick, or even teaching children as well. So again, this shows us just why religion and also places like monasteries and nunneries were so important, because of all of the different things that they did. It wasn't just about someone going to church, they also provided lots of other functions that nowadays would be provided by other institutions or other places within society, such as schools, hospitals, supermarkets, even maybe charities, things like that. And on the next few slides we can see photographs of the ruins of some different abbeys and churches that would have been there during the medieval period, but now you can go and visit these, and obviously it's just the ruins that have been left after all of these years. So this first one is of Whitby Abbey, which is somewhere in Yorkshire. It's also where Bram Stoker's Dracula was kind of based as well. So this is where we got the idea for Dracula's castle, when Bram Stoker actually visited. So on this particular slide we can see a very grand abbey. So this is something that we would expect to see now in a city or in a major town, and this is obviously something that would have been an amazingly large, magnificent kind of building at the time when it was built. It's all carved, there's lots of really elaborate stonework on there, so this would have been kind of a marvel for the local people. And it's obviously somewhere which is very big as well. So even in the medieval period there were towns that were larger than just the little villages, and this is the kind of thing that we would expect to see in one of those. And then by contrast, on this next slide we can see quite a small, quite plain church, and this is the kind of church that you would see in a small village or something like that. So you'd only have a few people going to this church, but that doesn't mean that this wouldn't be any less important than the very big, very grand church that we might see in a town. For the local people, this is still where lots of really important events would happen. They would go here every Sunday for their normal service. This is where you would go to get married. This is where you go to have a baby christened. This is where you go to have a funeral when someone died. This would be the focal point of lots of the different celebrations throughout the year, whether it was Christmas or it was Whit and things like that. And it's also where you would celebrate different saints' days as well, which is a day where you might get some time off work and things like that. So this was somewhere that was really, really important, and it's where most people's social life within a village actually revolved around. It was at the church, because that was the only other place to go apart from where they lived or the land that they farmed and worked on. So the next section, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at something called doom paintings, and we talked about this at the very beginning. Doom paintings were really, really important, and they weren't necessarily something that was there to look nice. They were something that was painted on the walls of a church, and they showed us really kind of graphic and quite elaborate, but also quite scary depictions of heaven and hell. The reason why they were there is because at the time there was an awful lot of people that couldn't read or write, so they wouldn't be able to read a Bible. They might not be able to understand even what the Bible was saying. They wouldn't be able to understand church services, because at the time church services were actually carried out in Latin, so they probably wouldn't understand what was being said. So for them this was a really, really good representation of what would happen to you when you died. And it showed that if you were good, you would go to heaven and lots of nice things would happen to you. But if you were bad, then you would get sent to hell and lots of really horrible things would happen to you. And it's this idea that was used to try and control people and to try and make people be well behaved and follow the rules and do as they were told, because if you did, then you get rewarded, but if you didn't, then you get punished. And we have lots of ideas these days that we think about, or lots of images and lots of different words that come into our head. When someone says heaven, we think of clouds and we think of angels and things like that, and when we think of hell we think of monsters and demons, of fire and violence and things. And a lot of this kind of imagery comes from these medieval doom paintings and the type of images that they would show and they would depict on church walls around the country. So in this bit of a doom painting we can see a demon who's actually got kind of 3 heads, maybe 4 heads actually, and he's got a wheelbarrow full of people that have sinned, and he's carrying them off for some kind of ghastly ending or fate which is going to await them. So again, this is another example of a doom painting, and we can see all the horrible things that are happening. So people are actually being thrown through a hole in the floor. So it's this idea that hell is something that's kind of below ground. And this is also linked to things like ancient Greece, where you have the underworld, so it's that kind of idea. You can see demons that are actually kind of eating people, so it even looks like they're eating a baby. They've got one in their mouth. They're kind of cooking people in large cooking pots and things like this. So it's this kind of idea that heaven is this really frightening, horrible place where really awful things are going to happen to you if you end up going there. And then again on this one, it's a slightly different take on it, but it's another example of doom painting, where you can see the people that are kind of skeletons and they've obviously done something really bad in their life, and then you've got the people on the other side that are very well dressed and look quite happy, and everything obviously for them looks like it's going okay. So on this slide we can see something slightly different. This is not a doom painting, this is an image of people going on a pilgrimage. So another way of people trying to make up for them doing things that were wrong or for their sins was if they went on a pilgrimage, so a long arduous journey to somewhere far away that would be really kind of not very nice and it would cause them discomfort, and they could go there, and then when they got there they could pray and they could say sorry for everything that they'd done. So this shows you a pilgrimage which is taking place. So on this next slide you can see the work, and this is what we would like you to actually complete and then return back to your teacher. So you've got a series of questions that we'd like you to answer. You again, as usual, need to use the scanned pages from the textbook. So you need to find the ones which are all about the medieval church, and all of the information that you need for answering these questions you'll find on these particular pages. On the next slide there are some sentence starters that you can use. So if you just go to the next one, and then if you pause the next slide, and then you'll be able to use those sentence starters to help you with your work. So on this next slide what you can see is the questions, but you've also got some sentence starters, so use these to help you out. It even tells you which paragraphs you need to look at to find the answers in the text. So if you pause the PowerPoint here and then use the scanned images to answer the questions, you can use the sentence starters if you want, but you don't have to. And just remember, you can either write them out or you can type them on a Word document. It's entirely up to you. So this is your plenary. So on this slide you've got a series of questions. The answers you can find either excuse me, from the work that you've done today, or you can find them in your knowledge organiser. Try and learn them, and then I'll give you the answers at the start of the next PowerPoint that we do together. So we'd like you to just send in your questions for this particular PowerPoint that you've done, but can you also learn the answers to these and maybe just give yourself a quick quiz before next week, and then you can go through the answers yourself at home and see how many of them you've got right. Thanks very much, bye, and I'll see you next week.